What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode. We're going to be using Ruby on Rails today to rebuild this bookmark search demo app. So inside of the Twitter dev GitHub repo, they have this demo showing how to build out bookmark search. And so I downloaded it, I've been playing around with it, but it's got a Node backend and it has a React front end, and we like to use Rails here. Oh no, it's not gonna actually work. Let's see. So I wanted to just like hack around on it and play around with building it out with Ruby on Rails. Basically, we're gonna just create a way to pull in our bookmarks and then use the context annotations for tweets that, that Twitter gives us, so we could build something like this so that it looks like we can log in with our Twitter and it'll look something like this. So we'll have sort of each of the bookmarks that we have created, and then we can click on concepts or topics, and it will filter out the bookmarks that we have down to only those that that matter. And these bookmarks, or like the context annotation for tweets, are based on some machine learning algorithms that Twitter adds to the data that we get back from the API. So let's go through and build this out. All right, we're gonna start with Rails new, and we'll call it bookmark tool Rails. And we're gonna use ESBuild today, Tailwind, Postgres. We're gonna not use any tests, and the main branch. While this is installing, what I wanna do is take a look at the code that came as part of that demo that Twitter gives us. So we have a bunch of routes inside here. This is using an Express app on the server. Most of these routes are for OAuth, for using the setting up like all of the tokenization and getting tokens for the V2 or the second version of the Twitter API. So a lot of these routes are for OAuth. And here we have a scope, and the scope tells us kind of like what we have access to. So we have tweet read, users read, bookmark read, and offline access. I have no idea what that offline access scope does, but we'll just use it so that we can mirror what they have. The only other thing that they have in this app that's kind of interesting is this request route, which sort of just proxies the Twitter API, passing in the token with just like bearer authentication with the token that came back from OAuth 2. It's dropping in a user agent here. I don't know if the user agent matters, but and then ultimately it's just kind of using fetch under the hood to make some request out to the Twitter API. So we're going to kind of like wrap all of this stuff up and try to rebuild it using Ruby and using Rails. So we've got our Rails app spun up here. Let's jump into bookmark tool Rails. We'll open up package.json. We'll drop in our script here, and we should be off to the races. I think we also do need to add a build script so that ESBuild runs. I have this blog post if you want to head over to cjav.dev, and it kind of just goes through the entire process that I use for spinning up a brand new Rails app. The thing I wanted to copy was this line here so that I have my build script that'll run ESBuild and run as expected. The only other, I don't know why that doesn't get dropped in as part of Rails new. I wonder if that's something we could like help with. I'm gonna set my local node environment to 16.13.1. You may or may not need to do that. Then I'm gonna say bin rails db create db migrate. That should create a new database for our app and migrate it if there's any migrations. There are none. So now I think we can say bin dev and cross our fingers and hope everything fires up. It did not, because, yes. Okay, so since I'm on an M1 Mac, I need to install this ESBuild Darwin ARM. So npm install this thing. Okay, now I should be able to run bin dev. Everything fires up nicely. We can head over to localhost 3000. Beautiful. Okay, so now we've got a basic Rails app running. This is cool. You've seen this a million times if you've watched this channel. Now let's add some authentication to Twitter. So we're going to add Twitter authentication to a Rails app. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to use the Omniauth gem. So I'm going to say bundle add Omniauth. And I also want to add the Omniauth gem for Rails Omniauth with, what is it called? Omniauth Rails CSRF protection. So we want this one for OAuth 2. So actually we're just going to say bundle add that thing. So that will add that gem. We also want to use this Omniauth 2 strategy. So this gem here, Omniauth 2, Omniauth Twitter 2. So bundle add Omniauth Twitter 2. This is the Omniauth strategy that we need for OAuth 2, which is the authentication mechanism that the v2 of the Twitter API uses. Okay, now what we want to do is open up config initializers omniauth.rb, and we want to set up Omniauth. So back here in the docs for Omniauth, we have a little thing that we can drop in. So we'll just drop this in here. Now this provider is a sort of test provider that's in development mode. So let's take a look at what that actually gives us. So we're going to need to restart the server since we changed some initializers and installed some gems. Now if we go over to localhost, if we say auth developer, actually this isn't going to work because it needs to be a post request for OAuth 2. So we actually need some sort of controller that's going to manage our root. If you follow the channel, you know that I like to use a static pages controller. So we'll say Rails G controller static pages root. It's going to create a controller for us, some views. So we'll open up our routes and say we want to route to static pages, and we're going to hit the root action of our static page. If we go over to our static pages root, this is going to be kind of where we land. So in order to actually hit that route, we do need a form that is going to make a post request to that route. So here we have a form tag with auth/developer. The nice thing about going through the setup flow for Omniauth with the developer provider first is that it kind of lets us set up our sessions controller and get the kind of like one pass through of the auth flow without trying to involve Twitter at all. So this first pass is really just kind of like setting up Omniauth. And then in the second pass, we'll set up the Twitter provider. So now we should have a form on the page. We're using turbo false here, so it doesn't use JavaScript on the front end to intercept the post request and then do its own thing with it. So we're just saying like use the raw built-in browser stuff here. So if we go over to localhost 3000 now we have this button, login with developer, brings us to this page where we can say test at example.com and click sign in. And now we see no route matches post for auth developer callback. So we have to go to our routes file and we want to add a new route here called post. And it's going to go to auth, and then I think it's provider with a colon, and then callback. And what we want this to do is go to maybe sessions create. So we need a new controller called the sessions controller, and it will have a create method because we're doing a post request. And this post request to the callback is also part of OAuth 2. So the reason why I'm using a colon here in front of provider, and I'm not just saying like /auth/developer/callback, is that developer is going to be swapped out with whatever the name of the provider is that we end up using. So that's going to be Twitter 2 in this case. It might, in some cases, be like Google or Facebook or whatever providers you're using, those OAuth providers that you're using with Omniauth. All right, so let's go Rails. Let's go generate a controller for our sessions. And in our sessions controller, we're going to have a create method. And again, in the docs for Omniauth here, we're going to see how we can access the data that is sent to us as part of that authentication request. So here I'm actually just going to do binding.pry render JSON of user info. And because this post request is coming from a third party, we want to skip the CSRF check that's going to happen. So I'm going to say skip before filter, verify authenticity token, maybe only on create, which it doesn't really matter because that's the only sort of action that we have here. All right, let's go back to our app and go through this process again. Skip before action, sure. It used to be called before filter. All right, binding.pry. Okay, so user info. All right, so we've got some user info here. This is great. This is what we actually want from the provider. So now we can actually access some stuff that's coming in from the developer provider for Omniauth. We're at a good point now where we can actually like make this work with Twitter. So we're going to go back to our initializer for Omniauth, and we want to add a new provider here. And the provider is going to be Twitter2. And the first thing we need to pass in is a client ID, the Twitter client ID. And so this is going to be sort of like the client ID, client secret. And then there's going to be some other stuff down here like the scope and the callback URL, etc. But I wanted to just first talk about this client ID and client secret. So if you go over to developer.twitter.com, you can go to the developer portal. It's free. You can sign up now. You can do like fully self-onboarded. So I have like a little project set up here, and I have OAuth 2 turned on. So inside of OAuth 2, which you will need for the V2 API, you want to go down and pick the type of your app. This should be web app. So come down and pick web app, and then enter the callback URI. So this is going to be the one we're using here. This was supposed to work with the demo that I was using earlier for the single page app, but it seemed, I don't know, for some reason it's not working. So notice that I have Twitter2 here. So it's going to be localhost 3000/auth/Twitter2/callback. This is important because this is going to be the route where at the end of that OAuth process, Twitter is going to send a post request with the information about the authenticated user, including their like token data. So this is where we want to add that, and then come down, save, and save. Once you set this up, you will be given some tokens. So you'll get like a client ID and a client secret, and those, I think after the fact, if you go to keys and tokens, you can see, yeah, you'll be able to see your like client ID and client secret. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store my client ID and client secret in the Rails credentials so that they're not exposed publicly. So I'm going to say rails.application credentials.dig Twitter client ID, and then the same thing for the client secret. So those are going to be the first two arguments. Let's actually just go double check inside of this provider here. Okay, so now we want the callback path and the scope. So the callback path is going to be this thing, and the scope is going to be, we want the scope to match whatever's in the demo. So let's just copy what we have there. Okay, that should work fine. Okay, all right. Is there anything else at the end here? There's not. So I think we should be ready to test this out. Oh, actually, we need to set our credentials first, right? Okay, so I'm going to say Rails credentials : edit. This will open up the credential editor. Now I don't have anything in here yet, so I'm going to say Twitter client ID and client secret. So you should fill these in from what you see in the dashboard again, the developer dashboard, with like your client ID and your client secret here. I'm going to drop mine in, and with the magic of whatever editing, it'll be populated. I'm going to close this file so you can't see, and we should be good to go. All right, since we changed some stuff inside of our credentials, let's restart the server, and let's head back over to our localhost 3000. And then instead of login with developer, let's update our root to have maybe another form here that has login with Twitter. And our auth is going to be auth/Twitter2. And we'll refresh this page. Now we have a login with Twitter button. We'll click on that. All right, we are brought to this page. If for some reason you don't see this page that's asking you to authorize the app, there's a couple different things that you can do to debug. One of which is that your redirect URI might be a little bit different. So if for some reason you've changed the redirect URI, like check on that. If you see just a generic page, you can also open up the terminal, or like, open up the DevTools. go to the network tab and look at this like client event thing, or look at the requests, and there will be one that has failed. In fact, let me just fail this for you so you can see what I'm talking about. So like if for some reason it says something went wrong, you can come in here and look at this request that failed, authorized code, and then it says the value you passed for the redirect URI did not match the URI of the authorization code, and then you can know like, okay, I've got to fix the redirect URI so that it has like the right auth Twitter to inside of here. So now, whatever, you get the idea. All right, localhost 3000, come back over here, log in with Twitter, authorize the app, and oh, we're redirected back, but it says no route matches get for auth Twitter 2 callback. Okay, so apparently, some of the providers are going to post and some of them are going to get. So let's go to our routes, and then we want to make this work for both post and get. So we'll refresh the page. Okay, now it kind of like timed out, so we need to like go back through the whole flow again. All right, log in with Twitter, authorize app. We're redirected back, and this user info might have some good stuff in it. Oh, nice. Okay, cool. So this is my actual user info. I've got a bunch here. I've got some information about the credentials. So this is going to be the actual token and refresh token that I can use to make API requests on behalf of myself or whatever user just authenticated. So I could say something like user info.credentials.token or expires at. So that's going to give us a Unix timestamp. I can also say user info.uid. That should give me my Twitter user ID. I think I can also say something like nickname. No, maybe user info dot methods. User info dot keys. Okay, so I've got provider info. Okay, so user info dot nickname. Cool. So that's going to give me my Twitter handle. Name should give me my actual name. Fantastic. All right, so that's kind of like all the data that we actually need. So if I just say like user info json.prettyGenerate. Let's see what that does. Oh gosh, that's gross. All right, so let's just look at user info. Okay, so snaky hash. What the heck? I don't think I've ever seen that. Snaky hash. Okay. All right, so let's go and figure out how to store this user in the database so that they can we can keep track of their tokens and refresh tokens, and then make authenticated requests on their behalf. All right, so let's go generate a new user. So we're going to say Rails G model user, and it's going to have the Twitter ID, the nickname, name, token, refresh, token, expires at, and what else do we want? Maybe their, I don't know if we want their profile image or something. Let's see, user info. Yeah, is this image, what does this give us? Oh, it's so tiny. It's so tiny. Okay, there's probably a way to get like the bigger photo or whatever, but we'll just use this for now. This should get us far enough. So let's open up this create users thing. So expires at is actually going to be a date time. So make that a date time. We want to make sure that all users have a Twitter ID entered. And then the name, token, and refresh token thing are going to change over time. So I think this is a good start. So we'll say Rails db migrate. And okay, so now we want to open up our sessions controller. This is where that user info data is available. Again, we can take out our binding.pry, and we want to do something where it's like, if the user, if we've already seen this user, we want to like update their stuff. Otherwise, create a new user. And either way, we want to like cookie the user and store their session. Whatever, we want to like store them in the session. So we're going to say something like U is user, maybe like, or let's say at user is user.find by Twitter ID is userinfo.uid. And then something like if at user.nil, then we're going to go into this case. Okay, so if the user is nil, then we want to create a new user. At user is user.create. And this is going to have the Twitter ID is userinfo.uid, nickname, name, token, refresh, token, expires at. All right, let's see if we can get these. So userinfo.info.nickname, userinfo.info.name, userinfo.credentials.token, refresh token, and userinfo.credentials.expires at. So this is giving us back a Unix timestamp, but we need to say like time.at that Unix timestamp .to date time so that we can put it in the database nicely. I think we want to say something like time.at credentials.expires at .to date time. Okay. Otherwise, I guess we kind of did these backwards, but whatever. So yeah. So if we've already seen the user, we want to update their tokens. So we're going to say at user.update. I think update bang is a thing. I don't know. 3YY. Boom. Okay. All right. So that should update their token. Now we want to cookie the user. So we're going to say session user ID is at user.id. That will make it so that we can look up the current user later. So let's see if this wants to work. So we're going to go and say we want to log in with Twitter. We're going to click on authorize the app. We'll redirect back. We're still printing out user info down here. We should probably just like redirect to maybe, yeah, redirect to bookmarks, which doesn't exist yet, but like ideally that's where we end up going to is this page. Well, what we can do is we can jump over to the Rails console. So I can say bin Rails C to open up the Rails console, and I can say user.count. And we have one user in the database. So let's make sure that user.last has what we need. It does. So it has the ID, the handle, the name, and then it has the token, refresh token, and when that token expires, which looks like it's in about 2 hours. So pretty short expiration, but we can use this refresh token to refresh and get a new token if and when that token expires. Okay, cool. So now we've got a user, we're able to log in. So yeah, I think we're looking pretty good with Twitter authentication. We should be able to use this token, by the way. So if I just actually cat like user.last.token here, then I should be able to take this and say something like curl-x. Actually, we just want to make a get to api.twitter.com/to users me with the header of authentication, authorization, bearer with our API key. Oh, look at that. Boom, we get back ourselves. Okay, so that proves that sort of the token is working. We're getting back our stuff. This 31248 whatever should match what we have here. It does. So now we know that this token is working. I think we're going to wrap there. And in the next episode, we'll go through and talk about how we can use these tokens to build a little client. We'll build a little Twitter client for making API calls out to Twitter. There is an old gem that works with the V1 Twitter API, but there's not. I wasn't able to find a new gem, so we're just going to roll our own using REST client. So stick around and take a look at that. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.